Being Black in America comes with its challenges. However, we understand that enlightenment through education is the oppressor's worst fear. By bridging the gap between academia and the people, our purpose is to equip you with knowledge that breaks down barriers during your journey towards truth and freedom. Welcome to the Black and Highly Dangerous Podcast.
Yo, Daph, what's up? What's up? How's your past week been?
My past week has been both busy as well as fulfilling. I finally got in my grades for my very first solo instructor class.
Hey.
I had to do that Monday night. It was a mad dash to the finish line, but I got it in. Although I won't lie, I still have some comments to add, but the grades are in. I did read everybody's stuff to see what grade I would give them, but just have to add a few comments to people's things.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. And I also got to see a family in Houston. So second stop on the family world tour. We went to Houston to visit John's mom and dad. And that was really nice. Normally when we go to Houston, we are ripping and running and trying to visit everybody. And everybody lives like 45 minutes to an hour away because Houston is just so sprawling. It's just everywhere. But it was nice because this time we just stayed with them and, visited with them and went out to eat and, spent time talking. And that was really nice because it was definitely a change in pace from what we normally do when we're in Houston.
No, that's good. Yeah, always seeing family, especially, again, mentioned this time and time, COVID messed a lot of that stuff up. So being able to reconnect, weather's nice, people are vaccinated. I know that's a good feeling. So I know you got a lot more of the family world tour left to go, but at least it's off to a good start.
Yes, at least I get to sit down for 2 weeks before the next stop because that's flying good. Is, it's tiring within itself. So.
Oh yeah, it is. And I don't know how people do that all the time, as a career kind of thing. Just fly all the time, whether they're consultant, business, athletes, they just always on a plane every day, every other day. That's a lot. I'm sure they get used to it, but, it is a lot. It does take a lot of work.
Yeah, for athletes, at least their planes are maybe a little bit more comfortable and spacious, but I'm pretty sure it's still tiring.
Oh, yeah. And they probably don't have to wait, like us regular folk to get on the planes and all that kind of stuff and check in. They probably just go straight to their planes that they have. But that's good though. That's good. Yeah, my parents, they'll be here a week and a half, which is good. I haven't seen them since around the holidays. So it's always funny because now, I've always gone months without seeing my parents and been fine. But it's when you have a baby, it's a little different because you want, the grandparents to see the child grow up. And so in the first year of life, it's every 3 to 4 months, it's they just develop so fast. So compared to when she was out here around the holiday season to her now, where she's crawling, standing, trying to walk, trying to talk, all that kind of stuff. It's just night and day. So I know they're excited to come see their granddaughter in the next week and a half.
That will be so exciting. Yeah, I just cannot believe how much, your baby is growing. I saw the Mother's Day pictures that you posted and I was like, oh, look at Ty being a dad and Kristen being a mom. It's so sweet.
Yeah, it's fun. It's busy, but it is an enjoyable experience. I will say that. So yeah, and keep you updated because she turns 1 in July, so we're getting ready to get her picture. Kristen's already getting her pictures together, or where we're gonna do that, and the outfits and the cake and all that stuff. Even though we still got a couple months out, it's still exciting.
Yeah, is she a Cancer or a Leo?
That's good. July 31st. So what? I guess that's a Leo.
Yeah, that's a Leo.
That's a Leo. Okay.
As long as Leo comes after Cancer, she's a Leo.
Yeah. Leo comes after Cancer. I know. I just never know the cutoffs because I know I'm a Cancer and I'm July 1st. So I wasn't sure if it was the whole month, but usually it's not the whole month. It's partial.
Usually it's it's usually about the middle of the month, around the 20th or something like that.
Yeah. So she's a Leo. So we'll keep our eye on that.
Oh, she gonna be the boss of that house.
I'm about to say she already running things, so I can see it. I can see it happening. All right, let's get to some old Lord news, and then we'll talk about today's guest after we share some of these stories.
Hello, and welcome to BHD News, where we give you the most current and eye-opening old Lord news of the week. Join us as we present news that'll make you want to say,
Okay, speaking of flying, airlines might have a very weird practice in store for us in the near future. Want to know what it is? We are already accustomed to taking off our shoes, taking off our belts, it's, already. But airlines could institute a policy where they weigh passengers before they are able to get on the planes.
Oh man, I Kristen did mention this the other day, and that is a wild step. Something about them being overweight, or like the plane being over capacity with weight or something like that. They need to check that. Is that the goal?
Yes. And so, I think over the years, Americans have gotten a little bit, a little heavier. I think the old guidelines, it used to assume that most passengers were about 170. And I think that included maybe their carry-on luggage or something like that. But that estimate, I think, has gone up to 185 for women or 184 for women in the winter, and 205 for men in the winter, and then 179 for women in the summer, and 200 for men in the
Everybody lose a little weight in the summertime.
Yeah, a little 5 pounds here and there. So, they said that, this was a FAA kind of recommendation. It is not an actual law, but they sent this out, I think 2 years ago or something. But I guess it's coming back up because, we've been eating during this pandemic, I don't know, but they could do it in more discreet ways. I think, I've actually been on planes where flight attendants have moved people around and mentioned balancing. So they are already judging your weight anyway, but maybe they have to formalize the process. I don't know.
Yeah, they shouldn't. They shouldn't leave it to the subjective criteria of flight attendants, because that can get messy.
Very much so.
But I understand how people will feel about getting weight. I mean, yes, it would have to be discreet. Only the people who are checking you in see it. They're not yelling everybody's weight in front of everybody, 215 in the back.
Maybe they can, how they have the desks where, you can do ticket changes and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Maybe they just put a scale in the ground and it's really discreet, and everybody is called up to confirm flight information, but they're actually being weighed.
Yeah. They need to do it that way. I mean, if it's a safety thing, I can understand. But yeah, I know people are just gonna be feeling uncomfortable with that, and I'm sure it'll motivate some folks to, hit the gym.
Yeah, child, that's me. New day, new me. Okay, we've talked about this before in terms of Black homeownership and how our wealth is often impacted because of racist practices within the real estate field. And we are back at it with another story because a Black homeowner in Indianapolis had to file a complaint after the value of her home more than doubled after she got her friend's white husband to stand in for a third appraisal.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So she bought a home. She rehabbed it. Her purpose was rehabbing the home. I think she bought it for $100,000, but put a lot of work into the home. Her first appraisal came back at $125,000, and she child, I don't put too much work in this. What's crazy is she got another one, and that one came back for $110,000. So 15,000 below. And then, after she got the friend's husband to stand in, it was appraised for $259,000.
Oh, wow. That's wild.
Yes, that's really wild. And so, she's actually filed a complaint, and we will see how that works out. What surprisingly, one of the appraisers, was quoted in the article and was like, responded to these claims and was like, I really want to know the identity of the third appraiser, and how they came up with those estimates, and I would never be biased, blah, blah, blah. But numbers don't lie. Or they do sometimes, but these numbers, I'm pretty sure, are not lying.
And at the bottom line is, if you buy a house for $100,000 and you renovate it, automatically the value is going to go up. So y'all not even increasing the value for as much as she put in. I mean, anybody that watches any of these, fixer-upper shows all the time, you always see that. And so that clearly these appraisers, no matter what they say, they were just in the wrong, inaccurate. Maybe it may not have been $259,000. I give them that, but y'all definitely severely underestimated, right? It should have been way more, just for the simple fact she did renovate.
Exactly. Okay, so, although the Capitol riots were, almost 6 months ago, we are still dealing with the fallout, and people are still actually being arrested. One of the latest is actually a rapper who goes by the name of Boozy the Don, who, for whatever reason, decided to create an album cover with him sitting on one of the SWAT trucks during the Capitol riots.
Wow.
Yes. And so when federal investigators saw that, they were like, you got these charges coming.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And he was charged with 4 federal charges, including unlawful entry and disorderly conduct. Although the rapper had previously stated that, he was already in Washington and just decided to go in and take pictures. Once they saw the album cover, they were like, dog, you getting charged.
Yeah, I don't know. People in this day and age just love telling on themselves with that kind of stuff. It's like, you put that out there, the feds is watching. The social media, and anything you put out there is liable and can be used against you. So that was just silly.
Yeah.
He
thought it was so cool.
Yeah, especially when the feds are involved. Like, they out here looking for every person that was at that riot, and they locking everybody up fast or slow. They're gonna get you, and you made it a lot easier for them. So, not smart.
Yeah. Okay, just got 2 more quick little stories. First of all, people should be aware that I think 20 or so Republican-led states have decided to rescind the extra $300 in federal employment pay that has been offered to people throughout the throughout the pandemic. One of the reasons that they are doing so is to force workers back into jobs, because I'm pretty sure you've been hearing like, nobody wants to work, or like all of these industries can't find workers. And Republicans are largely blaming it on this extra money, suggesting that, why would people go to work when they can make more on unemployment? So instead of saying pay them more, no, let's just take away the unemployment so they're forced to take those underpaying jobs.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this in our clubhouse past week. Because we were mentioning how Biden was saying similar things as well, that he kind of wants to remove unemployment or unemployment pay if people are rejecting suitable job offers, in his words. There's been a lot of pushback about that because, that's just kind of been conservative rhetoric for a while. Any kind of social welfare or social assistance they push back on. And two, I know it was brought up in the clubhouse room, is that there are specific job sectors that is affected by this. And one in particular is the food industry, right? Folks that make money off of waiting and waitresses and stuff like that. Have chosen not to go back to work because, again, forced back to work in jobs that are not going to be lucrative because people aren't really going in to eat as much as they used to. So you're not gonna get as many tips, all that kind of stuff. So again, it makes sense, right? Why folks wouldn't go back into those kind of industries, but you can't force people to work that kind of labor if you're not paying them, enough to survive. It just makes sense. And so that's the one, like you mentioned, that's one of the biggest issues. Oh, let's take their money away, but not give them more money to be comfortable. It's always been this American dilemma.
Yeah, child, big dilemma. Hopefully they can figure that out because I don't think it's right to, I think this pandemic is just showing people that like there's a better way. The government can offer support, and I don't know. I know they are, some of these businesses or the state governments are offering incentives. So like bonuses, like $1,200 or $2,000 bonus to, go back to work. But child, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But, it's going to be interesting to see how, I'm sure in the next year or two or a few years, we're going to start seeing a lot of discussion, research about how COVID changed the workforce and the workplace. Because I know companies are way more lax now with working from home, seeing that they're able to survive and people can still be productive, giving people an extra day off a week, extra vacation time. I've been seeing a lot of companies actually be more relaxed with their kind of policies. And I think that's going to go so much better with folks in childcare having flexibility. And I'm pretty sure these companies will be just as productive or even more productive because people will actually enjoy working or at least go to work with a peace of mind. Makes a difference with productivity for sure.
Agreed. Okay, my last story is just an announcement that I think everyone should hear. But the Supreme Court just agreed to hear a bid to slash abortion rights. They will consider Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban, and this will be the first abortion-related case they hear since Amy Coney Barrett has been confirmed. And, we'll just have to look to see what happens, but that's definitely something that people should keep an eye on.
Yeah, so that is a big one. And this has always been the worry with these changes of justices under the Trump administration. We knew things like this were going to come to the table, and here it comes finally. So we all have to watch carefully, hope and pray that the right thing happens, but you just really never know. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's something we will definitely be keeping our eyes on here at BHD and reporting if anything happens or whatever the results come out to be.
Absolutely. Definitely be following along. You got any Oh Lord news?
I got a couple stories. One is definitely Oh Lord newsworthy. Now, Daph, you and I both work in academia, and we've been in there for a long time. And we know that one of the big no-nos is, when you're writing papers, you were just saying you're grading papers, is we always check for plagiarism, right? That is just, in the academic world, that's just a big no-no. Academic dishonesty.
Yes. What's that song they've been playing on social media? Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. No.
Yeah.
That is a no-no.
That's exactly as a no-no. You can get kicked out of school. It's, one of those high crimes in academia. And recently, graduations have just occurred. Many folks have celebrated getting through just not the pandemic, but also completing their college degrees. And then usually you have, people give speeches and a keynote speech. Well, someone who's supposed to uphold these policies of, non-plagiarizing and academic policies and standing and honesty and all that kind of stuff is the university president. Well, unfortunately, the university president of South Carolina, Bob Caslin, has resigned because he plagiarized major parts of his commencement speech.
Yes, I did see that in passing, and I'm like, child, everything is recorded now. People remember, very memorable speeches. You can't just be ripping off of other people.
Yeah. He did. Retired Navy Administrator William McRaven And he was the military official who led the successful raid against Osama bin Laden.
Oh, wow.
And so he actually gave this speech at the University of Texas in 2014. So, and it's been viewed by millions and millions of people on YouTube. So it wasn't like he just took a speech that little bit of folks have known, but it was like a major well-known person and a well-known speech. And he took elements of that and didn't give credit, and now has resigned from his position as a result.
Wow. Well, that's a lesson to students and to other like professionals. The saying like, do as I say, not as I do. So that's a lesson, and don't be like that, y'all.
Don't be like that. Be careful out there. And I always tell my students too, y'all got to be, some professors take that real serious. And when they see somebody plagiarize, they go up the chain, and you can get really kicked out of school for stuff like that. I never take it that extreme, right? I just hit them with a 0, call it a day. I like, listen, this is what's supposed to happen, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to have you jeopardize your entire academic career because you were trying to cheat. But you're just going to take this grade, and you're going to, be accountable for your actions. But yeah, you got to be careful, because I've seen students get in a lot of trouble for that kind of stuff.
Well, it's crazy because when I was in undergrad, I was on the honor council, and I used to have to sit on like the panels to like decide what was going to happen. Crazy.
Yeah, they take it serious. They take that serious. They take it very more serious than also, if anybody ever watched The Hunting Grounds, this documentary about like sexual assaults on college campuses. And on one part of the documentary, they show the stats of like punishments for plagiarism versus like punishments for folks who have been accused of sexual assault. And it's always like exponentially more. They're way more punitive for folks who commit plagiarism than those who commit sexual assault.
That's crazy.
The stat. And these are big universities too, like the well-known ones in California. Like it was like, I think Harvard was on there, Yale, all these, they had the stats from all these schools. And I was like, wow, that's crazy.
Super
not,
crazy.
Yeah, not what we expect, right? Plagiarism is definitely not more of a serious offense than sexual assault allegations. And I think we can all agree there. Another quick story is that we know even on today, the day before this episode release, New York has fully opened up, the city again, which made big news. But this comes off the heels of the CDC not asking for a reduction or removing some of the mask restrictions for folks who have been vaccinated. And it's interestingly enough, the nurse, one of the biggest or the biggest nurses union in the country, the president of that union has criticized the CDC mask guidance and saying that this is going to increase public health issues as a result. And they were speaking out against it. And many folks have been speaking out against, like, whoa, this is getting kind of extreme, mainly not because maybe not due to the scientific facts of folks who are vaccinated, but because the way you implement this is basically off of an honor system, because you don't know who is vaccinated and who is not vaccinated. And so now folks are just going to be wearing masks, saying they're vaccinated, and there's really no way to prove it or uphold that. So you're still putting a lot of people at risk by removing these mask mandates. I don't fully understand why the CDC would move to do that quickly. I don't know if there's just money pressures or something from the government or other folks, but it doesn't seem to be the safest move, at least right now.
Yeah, I feel like there is this pressure around like saying like, we've got so many people vaccinated. We've, really turned this pandemic around. I feel like there's a narrative that our current elected officials are trying to create that will probably be used to bolster their reelection campaigns. To me, it's just all like 1 week after the other, the CDC, oh, you can do this, you can do this. And now, like, I don't trust people like that. I know even Florida, they literally just voted to ban vaccine passports. People, child, there are still plenty of people that will not get this vaccine. And so it will be up to you to protect yourself. I know, especially before we find out how often we need boosters, I'm not about to just be going unmasked.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely still going to uphold these mask policies because it's just, one, I'm used to it at this point. It's no big deal anymore. It's not like I'm just like, oh my God, I need to, just not have a mask on. It's just safety. But yeah, I've even seen an article recently. Somebody, I don't know if it was like CVS or one of those kind of pharmacy retailers. Somebody was caught giving out like fake. Not really fake. They were real vaccine cards, but filling them out for people to say they got the vaccine, and people were paying to get those cards without actually getting the vaccine.
Wow.
And I'm sure that is not the only person doing that kind of stuff. So it's even like, yes, most people are getting the vaccine. I'm sure most people are not lying, but there are folks who are, lying and not trying to get it and saying they have it so that they can be free. So yeah, am not buying into this honor system yet. I would like to wait some more time for vaccines to happen. I think these things should be keep in place.
Agreed. I
don't know why people get so mad about mask mandates. It's not really not that serious to me. People be so angry just to not put a mask on. It's like, come on now. You still get to go out. You can eat. You can still shop. You can do what you want. You just got to put a mask on. It's not. And they got all kind of great looking masks now.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't bother me because it's like I don't really smell anything when I'm out and about. I'm like, this is just pleasant. You can do whatever you want. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we'll see how this pans out. Really quickly, one thing on politics. I know you mentioned what was happening with some of the Republican states. And another thing is we've been talking about election changes in Arizona recently passed. Arizona Republicans, let me be specific there, recently passed a law that makes it more difficult for folks to vote, particularly the Navajo Nation in Arizona. They're the ones that came out and essentially flipped Arizona. And so now Republicans are pushing back and making it hard for them to vote. Again, we're probably going to be reporting on different case like this every week from a different state, which is the sad truth. But I do want to keep just making you all aware of what's going on, because it's just our purpose to kind of just discuss that kind of stuff.
Agree. It's kind of like you are trying to disenfranchise the original people of this country. Like the nerve of you.
Disgusting. So nasty. So nasty. Yeah, that covers everything. Daphne and I, we know there's a lot going on right now in Israel and Palestine, and there's a lot of conversations on social media. This is just one of those topics that Daphne and I just don't know enough about to feel comfortable to come and talk about it. We both said that we're trying to read up more and get a greater sense. And I know I've been trying to do, I know Daphne has been too. But we do, I put on social media, we talked about Clubhouse, all that kind of stuff. If anybody knows anyone that knows this stuff, studies it, knows it intimately, is an expert on this topic, please drop a line to us in a DM, email, or whatever. We want to have someone to come on to really talk about this if possible, because I think it is an important topic and we should discuss it, but we don't want to do it inappropriately, especially without knowing all the facts and the history behind what's going on.
Yeah. What's interesting is that Aisha Curry got blasted this past week because she posted a meme or some type of post that inaccurately portrayed what was happening. And it was just kind of like, if you don't actually know, just be quiet. And it's just one of those situations where we do want an expert to come in to talk about it. One thing we can say for sure is that what is happening is horrific. The AP building got blown up. I think just last night last night is Monday night. I think there were some more airstrikes. And that the loss of life is just absolutely devastating. So when we say that we don't want to talk about it, it's not that we don't want to acknowledge and say this is just horrible. It is, we don't want to speak on the facts of the struggle that is happening right now related to Palestine. So.
And I'm sure, and I know for a fact, we're not the only ones who are kind of a little bit lost. And so this is why we would love to have someone come on this platform and just educate Daph and I and our listeners, just to give us the background, because I know there's a lot of history behind of what's going, of decades and decades of history. And so there's clearly not enough time right now for me to go back and figure it all out. But I would love to have someone on who would love to come speak on that. So yeah, I'm in agreement there, Daph. The violence we've been seeing, regardless of whatever is happening politically, and I'm seeing images of children and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, at the very least, without even knowing everything as far as the underlying facts of what's going on, I would say that the U.S. needs to push for at least a ceasefire, right? And support that, because figure it out. Be diplomatic, try to have a conversation about what can be done, but let's stop the violence if possible, because that is nothing anyone should be advocating for.
Absolutely.
But all right, we'll keep y'all updated. Please think about, if you know anybody, let us know. We will reach out and we'll try to get them on ASAP. Just let us know for sure. All right, so let's talk about today's guest, who is Dr. Geniece Crawford Monde, here to talk to us about her research. She's in sociology and criminal justice at Wingate University, and she talks to us about her work looking at women and moms being incarcerated in and out the system as well, and adjusting to life after prison. And it kind of goes along this theme we've been discussing and focusing on women in general this whole month. And so we kind of cap it off with Dr. Crawford Monde to come talk to us about her work with this particular population.
Yes. We talk about our book project. We talk about myths and misconceptions related to formerly incarcerated mothers. And we, look at how race kind of shapes the experiences of women who are coming home. And just a really important topic.
And then also we had a little fun conversation about one of her papers, entitled Black Don't Crack, #Black Don't Crack, which is a content analysis of kind of aging Black women via social media. So that was also interesting too, because again, we see all those kind of conversations happen all the time. We see that hashtag anytime we find out somebody's 60, they look like they're 30, a Black woman, and then, they get the praise. And so she did a little study to investigate that a little further, which was interesting too, to say the least. So without further ado, let's get Dr. Crawford Monde on to come talk about her work, and then we'll talk to y'all afterwards.
For today's episode, we welcome Dr. Geniece Crawford Monde, an associate professor of sociology and criminal justice at Wingate University, whose research explores how criminally involved women manage their roles as mothers and caretakers. During the episode, we discuss her research agenda, including her upcoming book project. We also have a conversation about myths and misconceptions related to formerly incarcerated women and how race shapes women's post-incarceration experiences. Welcome, Dr. Monde.
I'm doing well. Excited to join you.
Yes. We're excited that you joined us. Before we get into some of your work and all that you do, we just like to ask our guests to start the conversation off by just telling our listeners a little bit about yourself. Introduce yourselves to our listeners, please.
Well, sure. So, like you said, I am a professor of sociology and criminal justice at Wingate University. I have been for going on around 8 years right now. And before here, I got my PhD in sociology from Harvard University. I went to undergrad at State University of New York, Binghamton. Go Bearcats. And I am from an immigrant family. My family immigrated here from Jamaica, and I was also born in Jamaica and was raised in New York City, Queens, to be exact. And so I like to tell that information to students as well, because all of those experiences help shape how I think about some of the sociological issues I discuss. I've been living in the Charlotte area for the past 7-8 years. I love Charlotte. I've adapted, I think, to the new South, as Charlotte likes to brand itself. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm looking forward to a lot of the engaging things that are happening, especially as it relates to women, and hopefully transformation in policies as it relates to our justice system.
Absolutely. So Tyrell and I are both sociologists as well. And Tyrell also focuses on the criminal justice system. And I'm always really interested in knowing like what sparked people's interest in becoming sociologists, because it's a, very unique field. So can you talk a little bit about that, like your pathway to, or motivation to become a sociologist, and particularly focus on your research questions?
Absolutely. When I went to undergrad, I thought I was going to be a doctor. That is one of the 3 careers oftentimes first generation immigrants are expected to matriculate into, and there's kind of a whole literature on that. But your parents go through all this hardship and they're like doctor, lawyer, engineer. And so I kind of followed in that path, and I genuinely did want to pursue medicine, particularly pediatrics. And I had this sociology course my sophomore year, and it really turned everything upside down. So many of the inequities that I witnessed growing up in New York City, growing up under the policy of stop and frisk, several, quite frankly, instances of well-publicized police brutality that I didn't really know how to articulate or even have the language to process. Sociology courses gave me the language to process those things. And that really sparked within me this desire to pursue sociology. And so I changed my major to sociology, and I then joined the McNair Scholars Program my junior year in college. For listeners who aren't familiar with that program, it's a program primarily focused on undergraduates, helping underrepresented populations prepare for the tools needed to enter into graduate level programs. And even at that point, my mind wasn't fixed on criminal justice. While I appreciated the language it gave me to pursue or at least understand criminal justice issues, and especially inequity within the justice system, I was focused on education. I wanted to be a sociologist of education. I actually went back and forth between sociology of education and maybe going into a doctoral of education program. I ended up doing a summer program at UNC Chapel Hill. It's similar to McNair in that it focuses on underrepresented populations. And that was an incredible experience. I think that really helped prepare me for graduate school. And it really made me pretty confident that this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to study inequity within the educational system. And I was, I matriculated into graduate school, going through courses and all the stress and everything that's associated with graduate school. And I remember getting an email from a professor at UMass Boston. And he was conducting an evaluation program of a program that had been organized by the Boston Police Department. It was called Weed and Seed. And this was a national program, but this was the Boston component of it, where basically you have partnerships with community members in order to address issues of youth violence. And so during the summer, I think after my 3rd year of graduate school, I spent the summer sitting in meeting rooms with law enforcement, community members, hearing some of the challenges that community members face, and quite frankly, the frustrations that they had with local police department in terms of having their needs met or having their needs, quite frankly, not listened to. And that ended up evolving into my master's thesis. And not only did it evolve into my master's thesis, but it really got me thinking about not just wanting to hear from community actors or people in positions who were speaking about the individuals who were framed as committing crime or being the quote unquote problem, but wanting to hear from those people directly, wanting to hear from the people most relegated to the margins of society. And, within criminology and sociology, a lot of the theories that we have about offenders are based on populations primarily of men, some of the most classic studies, white men in particular. And I wanted to learn about the experiences of women and what they faced and how they navigated the process after prison. And so that, kind of started my process in pursuing my dissertation, focusing on women, mothers in particular, leaving prison.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that journey. I think Daph can attest to this too, because if I remember, Daph, your undergraduate degree wasn't in sociology too, right?
No, it was actually in human and organizational development.
And I remember mine was psychology. It's just weird, like when I hearing the story of a lot of sociologists, how they don't usually start out as sociologists, and then something sparks or changes their interest, and then they get change a major or pursue it in graduate school too. So that was on par with a lot of other sociologists. And you mentioning these developmental programs, I think that are important because I wasn't a proponent of McNair, but I was familiar with it. I was in SROP, which is similar, another kind of research-oriented program for underrepresented groups that help you get ready or acclimated, prepared for graduate level education, PhDs. And so it's cool to see like the similarities in our journeys and how, a lot of folks who kind of make it to where we are use some of these resources of getting there. So I appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about your research agenda. We know that you focus, like you just mentioned, on formerly incarcerated mothers. So tell us more about that. You told us a little bit how you got to that point, but what are some of the things you found while you were doing this research and things that, stood out to you?
Right. So the literature, a lot of the work done on mothers who are marginalized from society, focused on some of the obstacles they face in accessing resources, the barriers they face, the pushback they face when they try to matriculate or integrate within certain spaces. And for me, I was interested in how women who occupy what is otherwise framed and portrayed in society as in some spaces, and I speak a bit about the racial components to how motherhood is framed, they occupy the space of motherhood that is considered, by some even sacrosanct, or at least it's written about it in that way in certain political circles. And so how they negotiate that identity, being mothers, with what is portrayed as being a violation of that identity, having committed offenses. And, oftentimes people who have committed crimes, people who have been incarcerated, are not written about as humans. They are written about as statistics. They're written about as numbers, deviants, in such negative ways that it's really easy to strip individuals of their humanity. And like anyone, the women I spoke to have stories and experiences. So what I wanted to do was hear from women themselves and hear their stories about how they managed and negotiated these experiences of being mothers, daughters, sisters, while also being told that they're less than by wider society. I was granted entree into two organizations. I do in the book that I'm writing talk about three, but primarily two organizations. One was a residential program in New York, and one was a non-residential program in the Boston area. And the directors of both programs were very receptive, and I'm forever grateful for that. They allowed me to go into the organization, to advertise my study, to volunteer. One of the things, if you're familiar with ethnographic or even qualitative work, is that you don't just want to take up space, you want to partner with, if individuals are willing to partner with you and say, how can I be of service to you? You are granting me access. How can you use me, basically, to help? Because a lot of these programs are underfunded. Every year, the budget is kind of a question mark. And so I worked on developing flyers for programs that were happening. I cleaned out, huge files that needed to be reorganized, whatever I needed to do to make their lives easier because they were granting me access. And it also was really nice because I was able to speak to staff in casual ways, about things that were happening. And it kind of took me back as I was writing the book because I remember, the morning, or the week that there was, the royal wedding that was happening with Prince William, and everyone was gossiping about it in the office, and just be able to develop that kind of rapport with staff members, right, was I think really valuable because knowing that I would be writing these stories, I wanted to really keep in the forefront of my mind that I was writing about people that I had spent time with. I was mindful of the fact that there were differences in position and privilege. I think that's important it's important to be reflexive about that as a sociologist. But I also wanted to be able to recognize that the stories that I was writing about were from real people, not a sample, not a data, not just respondents. And so in writing or in interviewing women, one of the things that I found was we often think about incarceration as this moment, like this watershed moment. This happens and everything falls apart in a person's life. And in some ways, and for some of the women I spoke to, it really did function in that way. But for the vast majority of women, and I interviewed about 70 women in total, there were layers of marginality. There were layers of trauma that women were experiencing, such that when incarceration happened, it wasn't like this nadir of their life. It was one in a series of experiences that confirmed to them that they were marginalized from society. So the statistics of childhood trauma, childhood abuse, childhood neglect for individuals who are incarcerated outpaces significantly that of the general population. And when we think about the impact of that on how women then think about what happens when they are incarcerated, what happens when they commit a crime, what happens when they're separated from their children, the pain is very real and it's very tangible, but it's also cumulative. So we can't just speak about the pain of incarceration, right? In criminology, there's this theory or conceptual framework that focuses on the pains of imprisonment, where you focus on the specific things that are lost within prison and the trauma that's experienced within prison. But it's really much more cumulative than that. The trauma happens oftentimes from very young all the way up through adulthood at the point of incarceration, and then even after that. And I really wanted to focus on what that experience was like for women. And I would say one of the other findings, most significant findings for my research and conversations with women, is how they explain what motherhood means to them. Motherhood in U.S. society is often and has historically been framed in ways that valorizes a type of middle class, usually white, portrayal of what motherhood means. That is the ideal. And that is not necessarily a version of motherhood that is either accessible to or even esteemed in the same way as other populations. The problem, however, with that is if a certain group of people fall outside of that expected normative framing of motherhood, they're framed as being deviant. They're portrayed as being unwilling to conform to the norms of the quote unquote American family. And what women did was they spoke about motherhood in really interesting ways. There were some women who almost, who you could tell they were aware of that ideal of motherhood, right? So the idea that, a woman who commits a crime, who is arrested, who is separated from her child, she doesn't care about being a quote unquote family mother, family woman in the, again, mainstream middle class sense depicted in the media. But these women were very much aware of that. I had women who who talked about wanting to be Betty Crocker. So not just being a quote unquote good mother, they wanted to excel and exceed beyond expectations, even expectations, quite frankly, for, middle class or upper middle class mothers. There were women who said, I want to be that kind of mother who sits down with my children and we play games and we bake cookies and we do all these things together. And in listening to those conversations, one of the things that I discovered was that women want to demonstrate their proximity to this ideal of motherhood, not just because they want or care what other people think about them, but they're also constantly having to negotiate what they say in terms of their aspiration and goals with the very real rewards and consequences that come with the reentry process. So you're successful, quote unquote, within the reentry process if you're making and meeting certain milestones. And so by articulating the desire to attain a particular ideal of motherhood, you're signaling to individuals that I am proceeding through the process of reentry in a successful way. I am demonstrating that I'm closer and getting closer to meeting the goals I need to reunite with my child, to make the requirements for housing, to gain employment. And even though women knew what my role was, they knew that I was not, related or in any way attached to the correctional system. I wasn't a psychologist. Some women kind of thought of me as occupying a type of therapeutic space, which made sense because I just was there to listen and not tell them what to do. It's difficult to completely disentangle that relationship because, again, I'm one more person that they can speak to and convey that they are along this process and fulfilling and meeting these milestones along the process. And so this just wasn't something that I was seeing. I certainly had seen it in some scholarship, but really wasn't the focus in a lot of places that spoke about formerly incarcerated mothers, that they aspired to achieve milestones of motherhood, but that aspiration was in part within the context of rehabilitation agencies and organizations that require that they also meet those expectations and norms related to motherhood.
Thank you for that. Very, very thorough details into your study of formerly incarcerated mothers. You really highlighted some unique findings. And one thing that stuck out for me in your answer is because I am also an ethnographer. And so that idea of reciprocity is so very important. So I'm happy that you highlighted that for the listeners, because researchers, they often go into communities who give us a lot and, help us to push our career forward. But it's also important to think about, like, what are we giving back? But in addition to that, you also mentioned kind of racial differences. You didn't hone in on it. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit more, about thinking about from a Black mother or Black woman versus white woman, perspective, what are some of those unique differences between those formerly incarcerated populations?
So absolutely. So the number of women that I interviewed was, like I mentioned, around 70, and approximately half of those women were Black women. Around 20 or so were white women, and the remaining number of women self-identified as being Latina, with one or two women identifying as mixed race. So in thinking about the differences in the experiences of race is really, really important. One of the things that I think as researchers, especially qualitative researchers, that we can neglect is assuming that because the people we're speaking to don't explicitly state these differences, that they don't exist. And this has happened in other qualitative work that I've read, where, the individuals don't say they feel that they've been marginalized specifically because because of race. And so the researcher then says, well, race is not a big issue in this particular sample or in this particular study. And I think it's really important to frame whatever we're doing within the broader social system and ecology of racial inequality in which we exist within the United States. So, for example, when speaking to women and listening to women and then thinking about the broader context, I was very mindful of the fact that the trajectory that women would be on would in some ways be shaped because of race. So for formerly incarcerated women, when we think about something like the labor market, that experience is going to be different because of race. Again, women may not have these conversations, like a Black formerly incarcerated woman may not have a conversation with a white and formerly incarcerated woman and share their experiences applying to the same job, so that they can actually check notes and see who had a different experience. But in general, those experiences are going to be different. So one of the most popular professions for individuals who may have completed a high school degree or haven't completed a high school degree are professions like hairstyling, cosmetologists, right? Or child care workers. These are positions that are disproportionately occupied by women. These are also positions that require licenses from the state. Well, what happens when you have a criminal record? That is no longer an option. So when women are trying to rebuild their lives after prison, disproportionately, because the majority are minority women, a lot of those professions are closed off from them, making it much more difficult to gain jobs. If we think about other jobs, so, jobs that they are able to attain, there is still a racist system that they're up against, and there's a tax that they pay. So many, a pretty popular study, and many people may be familiar with this, is the study by Diva Pager, a sociologist, who a number of years ago did an audit experiment, which was at the time was definitely novel within sociology. And she wanted to determine whether a Black man, her study focused on men, a Black man with a criminal record was more or less likely to gain or equal to gain a job or interview than his white counterpart. And in the study, she also included the resumes of white and Black men who did not have criminal records. And the surprising thing with her study was not only were Black offenders less likely to get callbacks than white ex-offenders, that wasn't as surprising, was the fact that Black men without a criminal record were also less likely to get callbacks than white men who did have a criminal record. So a number of years later, Natalie Ortiz, while she was doing her doctorate at Arizona State, she wanted to see if this applied to women as well. And lo and behold, similar things were borne out in the data. So, she had, again, Black women and white women, and she had Latino women also in her study, again, trying to compare the experiences. And she found that Black women without a criminal record, no criminal record, were 37% less likely of being called back for a job interview than their white counterparts. So imagine the extent to which Black women who do have a criminal record are now facing the tide winds of racism. One of the reasons this happens is because there are these overarching stereotypes of Black women, particularly Black women who have a criminal record, as being quote unquote welfare queens. And that's a racist stereotype that basically means that Black women in particular, are leeching the system, wanting to do as little and get as much as they can. And this unfortunately infiltrates hiring processes, making it much less likely and much more difficult for Black women to attain jobs. And the last thing that I will say about the broader system of inequality as it relates to race and Black women within the criminal justice system is something that isn't often discussed. And that is, even within the Black community, there are differences that are teased out. So Ellis Monk, he's a sociologist, I believe, at Harvard. He conducted a study where he wanted to determine if skin tone had an impact on the criminalization of Black men and Black women. So overall, he found that African Americans, or I'll say Black to generalize it, that's the terminology that he uses, Black people with darker complexion were 30% more likely to, or had a 30% higher chance of incarceration. And then narrowing down on Black women in particular, he found that Black women with darker skin tones were serving 12% longer sentences, or their sentences were 12% longer than other Black women who had lighter complexion. So the proximity to even physical representation of whiteness, at least that's what's defined by the criminal justice system, exacerbates the toll on Black women in general and Black women with darker complexions in particular. And these just aren't things that, you know, if you are a Black woman navigating your way through the system, you're constantly thinking about. Some women were, but those were some women who had spent time in prison reading, spending time in the law library, looking at literature. But a lot of women were just trying to survive, trying to take care of their children, trying to reunite with their families and remove the stigma of incarceration as far away from them as possible. So, you know, even if women didn't speak explicitly about the way race impacted them, they certainly were impacted in very insidious ways, unfortunately, that altered and impacted their trajectory.
Oh, thank you for that response. I think that was very good and enlightening, insightful as far as the racial differences that I think, you know, sometimes don't get taken into account. And I really appreciate the fact that even like you said, during data collection, sometimes it's not explicitly mentioned, but the differences are there and they are very real and they do exist, and having all the evidence to back that up. So I appreciate that. You know, I also saw on your social media that you're currently writing a book on formerly incarcerated mothers and agency. You know, is most of what you discuss here going to be in that book, or is it going to be a different focus?
So yes, that is going to be the data from those interviews will be what comprises the book. Hopefully that book will be coming out in 2022. It is under contract. And I will be speaking about, you know, each of these issues. I'll also be talking about the relationships that women have, intimate partner relationships, and how that figures into their experiences transitioning back to society. Also about how women speak about their relationships with reentry organizations, which can sometimes be a complicated relationship. So this will be the book. It's the title is a working title. It's, you know, right now the working title is This Is Our Freedom. And one of the things, even just in thinking about titling the book, that I really wanted to do was have the words come from women I interviewed. So that title, if it ends up being the title, is actually from a quote that one of the women I interviewed said. And it really reflects the overarching theme of the book that, you know, women often felt that the criminal justice system was against them. The quote from that particular woman, she felt that even her lawyers really weren't invested in her case. And she said, you know what, this is our freedom. You, and when saying you, she was referring to her attorney. She's like, y'all are already free. You know, you're not really invested in this, but this is our freedom. And we are trying to navigate through this process, and we are trying to reunite with our children. And there was this sense of frustration. There was this sense of ownership, and there was this sense of agency in what she was saying that I think was captured in a number of the conversations that I had with women.
Awesome. Well, we will be looking out for that book. Really excited. We do want to switch gears a little bit because you have a paper that we, you know, just kind of want to get your thoughts on. Black Don't Crack, a content analysis of the Asian Black woman in social media. And just, can you tell us a little bit about that paper and line of research?
So that was a really fun paper to write. And I know that might sound strange. Academic papers, journal articles aren't always the most fun to write, but it was very much outline of my area of research, thinking about formerly incarcerated women. But it's an issue that I've certainly thought about. And I was really interested in how marginalized women, and that kind of is the theme that connects that paper to my focus on formerly incarcerated women, how marginalized women subvert the language expectations of wider society against them. And we know that Black women within the political and economic beauty economy within the United States have historically been relegated to the margins, going all the way back, of course, to slavery. And thinking about how women were able to, not just women, but how people in general were able to subvert those racist stereotypes and kind of turning it, those stereotypes on their head by embracing valued aspects of beauty. So, for listeners who aren't familiar with the expression Black don't crack, it's kind of this colloquial expression within the Black community that speaks to, kind of this agelessness, or at least a slowing down of agelessness. So, you might see a woman who is 50 years old, but she looks like 35. And, we might say, see, Black don't crack, right? And I wanted to see how that was being framed across social media and how it provided this really interesting counter narrative to beauty casting, physical attractive casting, in which unfortunately Black women often fall on the short end of the stick because they're held to the standard of a white beauty aesthetic. And so I used the site Tumblr. It's a microblogging site. I would imagine it's maybe not as popular as it might have once been, in part because some of the features that Tumblr uniquely had have kind of been embraced by other social media outlets as well. But women, or can't say women because I didn't know the gender identity of the posters, but individuals would, post their thoughts and often images about particular topics. So I searched the hashtag, and hashtag activism is a growing area of research. Folks like Andre Brock, who I believe you had on your podcast not long ago, spoke about and does research about hashtag activism and how that can be used to mobilize marginalized communities. And so I searched that hashtag Black Don't Crack and the images that arose from that. And I think in total, I had around 60, maybe 58 unique images. And I searched that from the fall of 2016 to the spring of 2017. And the number remained fairly consistent. And thinking about how the users frame that, or the different categories that the images fell into. So there's one category of images that use the meme, and I'll quote here, Black women be like. And to give listeners a visual of what those memes would look like, they think of an image of a 7-year-old girl with curly hair, and then the caption on that image says, Black woman be like, I'm turning 50 next week, right? So this hyperbole of a girl who's obviously no more than 7 or 8 years old and saying like she's 50 years old. It's a part and parcel of the tradition of Black humor within this country that in some ways has really helped in times of tragedy. And there's a broader literature on that, on the tradition of Black humor. And then there was another category of celebrities that were used to focus on the agelessness of Black women. And this was really interesting for me because in both framing the agelessness of Black women, so again, this counter narrative of beauty stereotypes, there was also this dynamic of embracing those stereotypes. So the women that would be seen in those images were like women like Halle Berry, women who are extremely wealthy, who also meet a certain aesthetic that some can argue is somewhat proximate to the white beauty aesthetic. Not in obvious ways like skin tone, but very thin, lighter complexion, hair texture, maybe looser curled. And so one of the things I talk about is problematizing the use of particular celebrities in those images, because what does that then mean for Black women who fall outside of those particular images or portrayals of Black femininity, Black physical attractiveness? Because that, of course, was the implicit message from those images. And I want to say the third category was strategic comparisons. And one of the things that I talk about in the strategic comparisons part of the paper is that Black women historically have been relegated to these negative stereotypes. The three that I briefly talked about in the literature review is the Mammy, Jezebel, and the Sapphire. And just to really briefly summarize, the Mammy typically is framed as the opposition of white femininity norms, at least. So she's often portrayed as being overweight, maybe middle-aged, very subservient. To give, probably the best image of this is the Mammy character in Gone with the Wind, who is, of course, the maid for the Scarlett O'Hara character. And I want to be clear, I'm focusing on the character and not the actress, who was the first Black woman to receive, Hattie McDaniel, the first Black woman to receive an Academy Award. Then there is the Sapphire, who is the prototype of the angry Black woman stereotype. And that portrayal was often used to emasculate Black men in media, especially during Jim Crow radio and early television programs. And then there's the Jezebel. The Jezebel deviates from the previous two because she's not always physically or readily identifiable as a Black woman. She may be mixed race, lighter skin. Her hair may be straight or loosely curled. And so as a way to counter the fact that she approximates in some ways the white beauty aesthetic, racist, slave society and beyond would often frame the Jezebel as very promiscuous. And so one of the things that I say in talking about strategic comparisons is that women, or the content producers are idealizing Black women in a particular way through, talking about their agelessness. But it's really important not to compare that with what's historically been done, because when you have a marginalized group turning the script or flipping the script and saying, we have this particular aesthetic that is distinct to us, it's not the same thing as what's been done to say Black women are unattractive because they don't look like white women. Because at the end of the day, when content producers subvert that norm, they're not able to implement legislative policy, right? I mean, this is one of the conversations about racism and how racism is impact or institutionalized and why that's different, right? If you're a minority, if you're a minoritized, person versus someone who actually has the power to impact institutionalized change and to impact in really harmful ways the lives of those individuals that you're marginalizing. So for me, it was just really fascinating to look at content production and how it can be used to change the narrative. And like I mentioned, it draws on the work of Andre Brock, and I also draw on the work of Goffman, thinking about how it manages impressions. And there's a lot of work being done on Black Twitter that kind of follows the same pattern. So it was like I said, it was a really fun study to look at all those images and memes. It almost felt like I wasn't doing research, but I definitely learned, and I enjoy the project.
Yeah, I always enjoy hearing engaging research like that, because it always does seem like, fun fun to do. And I feel like it's also fun just because folks typically do that anyway on social media, the memes and research and pass them around, and it kind of makes us laugh and chuckle.
Exactly.
Like you said, Black humor is definitely important for a lot of reasons. So I can see why that would be fun. You know, like you said, you did this in 2016, 2017, and the way social media operates, it's always rapidly changing every year or two. You know, I guess since then, currently, I'm not sure if you're still looking at this line of research, but have you just noticed similar things with social media today, maybe with newer forms like TikTok, et cetera? Are there any differences, or you're not sure?
So to be quite honest, I've wanted to, but I'm just consumed with the writing of this book and meeting my editor's deadlines. I'm really interested in how, and I've struggled with this, and this goes kind of to the side of, or in line with the personal aspects of conducting research. As a woman, as a Black woman in particular. So I've been thinking about how social media has framed the experiences of Black women who have been victims of violence. And so that's a much more somber subject than this previous paper. But I've been thinking about that. There have been pieces written, for example, about the memification of Breonna Taylor, which perhaps began unwittingly during the summer of 2020, and it soon became a way that felt very disrespectful to her memory. And this was felt by a lot of people, even those, again, many who did that didn't feel that they were downplaying the seriousness of her death. And thinking about not just her, but other Black women who've been victims. And by victims, I don't just mean Black women who have died as a result of police violence or brutality, but Black women who've been victimized in general, and how social media activism or hashtag activism can begin with the intention of bringing awareness and be pretty impactful and successful in doing so, and how those movements can sometimes be co-opted by those who are really just trying to virtue signal. So they're not really interested in doing the work. They're not really interested in bringing awareness to those issues, and how that can water down the impact of that. And, there are some conversations right now going on, quite frankly, about that. And I think those conversations are really important. Recently there was, I don't want to kind of derail the conversation, but there was some tension around what the mother of Tamir Rice said by individuals, whereas many people said that she has every right to be frustrated that some of the well-known activists have taken up a lot of space. And in taking up a lot of space, they've pushed some of the families and parents of these victims to the side. And so just kind of tying that all in and thinking about how do we use this powerful tool of hashtag activism and bring awareness without it becoming diluted into a way for people to commodify it on, at the expense of victims and their families. But I'm not working on that now, since, I'm trying to focus on, this last edit for this book. But that definitely is something I'm hoping to be able to return to by the end of the year.
I followed that conversation a little bit as well. And I think it is an important conversation to be had on both sides of the issue, because I know when it comes to activism, there's a lot of risk and a lot of costs involved in doing it. But at the same time, the stories that they use to create change are based around, real life people and their pain. And, that's just a
really interesting conversation, and I look forward to where that goes from a scholarly perspective. But this has been a really, really great conversation. We've discussed a lot, but we always like to close the interview by just, allowing you to have the floor to maybe discuss anything that we didn't ask about, but that you'd like to mention.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'd like to just share something that I learned in the process of writing. If you've ever taken on a study, especially with people who have often not been heard, it can be heavy. The stories can be pretty heavy, and it takes time to process. And, my first interview was conducted in 2010. So this has been a decade, and I'm still processing some of those stories. And one of the things that I have really come to think about in really a deep way is the difference between giving voice to marginalized populations and listening. Very early on in this project, I was young in graduate school, trying to figure things out. I thought of myself as giving voice to the women that I was interviewing. And at this stage, I think that perspective was wrong. And well-intentioned, but wrong. The women that I interview, or any marginalized population that researchers are invested in and spending time with, those people have a voice already. The problem is they're not being listened to. And so when we think about the work that we do, and when we think about the communities that we're embedded in, it's always really helpful to remember that we are not, these heroes who are giving voice, because we have these outlets, we have scholarly writing, we have books, but we're not giving voice to these individuals. They were never voiceless. Society just chose not to listen to them. And by writing their stories, by listening to them, we are just saying, you need to listen to them. And so when given the opportunity, if we are called into spaces to speak about our books, to speak about our work, to say, this is what I've done, and this is what I'm doing. But if you want to, pay me, for example, to speak on this stage about this issue, I think it's really important that joining me in that space is a formerly incarcerated woman. Right. So she can speak about her stories. And, this is something that I've done in classes. I've had formerly incarcerated women from the community come in and speak to students about their experiences. Just always trying to be mindful and acknowledge that we as academics are privileged in some ways. And we need to make sure that the people that have, to be quite honest, helped our careers, right? If these interviews or ethnography or what have you is the basis for the books that we write, are also being able to share their stories in very personal and authentic ways.
Yeah, that's important. I appreciate that framework. And I think, hopefully our listeners and other scholars, take heed to that, because I think it is important to give space and not kind of like co-opting other voices or things of that nature, and just making sure that, hey, we're here to maybe be a vessel, but if you want to know more or learn more about it, there are plenty of folks who can speak more directly about it than I can. So I appreciate that recognition, especially that can get lost sometimes when we all are trying to do our research and gain, prestige in the field, if you will. Sometimes folks can act as the voice for said population when that shouldn't be the case. So that awareness is definitely important. All in all, this has been a great conversation. Got a lot of great content out of this, and I'm sure our listeners have too. Where can people find you? Social media, anything like that you would like to plug? So if folks want to keep up with your work and what you're doing, they can locate you there.
Sure. I'm on Twitter. My Twitter is at Dr. Geniece. That's at DRGENIECE. And be on the lookout for my upcoming book with the University of California Press, spring or fall of 2022.
Yes, California Press.
Nice.
Awesome.
That's awesome. That's an awesome accomplishment. Yeah, we'll definitely be on the lookout for that, and be really interested in trying to read it, and maybe bring you back on to talk about it if you like, when that time comes. But for sure, we'll definitely plug your social media to the description of this episode, so our listeners can make sure you go click on that link, follow her to keep up with all her latest work, and see all the work she's doing. Outside of that, we want to thank you, Dr. Crawford Monde, for taking the time to come chat with us today and, drop some knowledge and gems for our listeners.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yo, Des, what do you think about Dr. Geniece Crawford Monde coming to talk to us about all her good work, looking at formerly incarcerated mothers and, of course, the Black Don't Crack analysis, which I thought was pretty fun. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I really enjoyed the interview. A lot of it resonated with me as an ethnographer. That's kind of an identity that I lead with in terms of being a researcher. And it's interesting because I just did a guest lecture in a class about qualitative research. And my final words to the class before I signed out of the Zoom was that we can't just take from the communities that we go in to research. We also have to figure out how we give back, how we can contribute to that community. So for me, that involved similar to what Dr. Crawford Monde did, I helped out in the school when I was there. I wasn't just, kind of dead weight. Like, it was a lot going on. So, I was really active and involved. And after the fact, it included creating a PowerPoint of the findings that I thought could be really useful for practice at the school. So, that just really resonated with me. And I'm happy to, hear somebody else say it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that's important. And, similar to both of you, yes, same with me. That's how I started doing my work in Newark, because that's where it's one of the sites where I did my research. And after I finished, I'm like, y'all gave me all this great data and let me in. So how can I be of service to you all? What do you need and how can I do it? And I've been volunteering there for 5 years, which has been great, and I think that's what, a lot of folks need to keep in mind when you're doing this kind of stuff is, be a resource. They're helping you get your dissertations, get your publications, get your tenure track jobs. So in what ways can you return the favor and help, make their lives a little better or become a resource is definitely a good point. I'm glad she made that. I also appreciated the discussion of how she was just breaking down a lot of these criminological concepts and theories and putting her research. It was very, very thorough analysis of her work, which was really good. Talking about Deborah Page's work, which I think is very important in talking about Dr. Ortiz's work after that, of how they looked at women, which I wasn't too familiar with, but now I'm going to have to go look up so I can start to share that with my students too. And those just experiences of formerly incarcerated women in general, mothers, and how, that impacts their lives and the differences, even the racial differences, was all intriguing.
Absolutely. That was what stuck out to me as well. And, I felt like I was in somebody's classroom. She was giving all the citations, all the references, even pointing out Andre Brock, who was, recently on the show. And so, seeing how these different domains of sociological research connect together, thinking about skin tone. Of course, it was also fun to hear about her Black Don't Crack study, and thinking about, how physical appearance, feeds into these stereotypes and who are we actually using to put forth that meme,
100%. 100%. Yeah. I think that's something we all see. We've all used, we probably all said, at least those of us in the Black community. And so seeing somebody kind of do a deeper dive into it with social media. It's just cool to show you, like you said, the breadth and the expansion of, sociology and all you can do with it, even being what seems to be more of a criminologist or criminology work, criminal justice related work, venturing out and doing this work too, still having the skill set and the tools to be able to do something like that is pretty cool too. And I wonder if there's ever things that in my own career path that I'll be like, I want to just, look into this a little more and write a paper on it. I feel like a lot of people, if you look at a lot of major academic CVs, they usually have one or two articles that are kind of just real random compared to the rest of their work. And I always feel like those are like little like hobby projects or something that, you know, you look at and you just want to write a paper on because it's fun to you. So I always like seeing stuff like that when folks venture out a little bit. I know they say, oh, don't do it pre-tenure, don't do it pre-tenure, because they want to have the same consistency with your output. But, you know, I feel like at some point it'll be fun to do something like that. I don't know what I would do.
That's a good question. What would I do? I actually have to think about, one project that I actually want to do is, it still kind of aligns with education, but I'm not sure how much it'll actually like count for my CV. So in the interview, she talked about ethnography, which is a very particular type of qualitative research. And last year after graduation, I decided that I want to write an autoethnography, instead of like an autobiography, but really taking my life experiences around education and looking at it from a sociological perspective.
That's dope.
So that's going to be my little side project.
Yeah, that's a good one. Because also it's almost like an autobiography, but like with almost like a research analysis to it of your own life, and you analyzing your own stuff. That's actually pretty dope. I feel like I wonder if like that, you know, I wonder if all sociologists had to like, if that was like a requirement in graduate schools, if we all had to like do something like that, that would be like a fun class to take, like a autoethnography class where we all got to kind of sit back and reflect and draw sociological connections to our own life. That would be dope.
Yeah.
I would enjoy something like that.
Yeah. I'm going to actually write the name of that course down because I like that as a future course, and you should teach it too.
That would be dope. That would be dope. So that's funny. That's a good idea. I know in graduate school, I had an idea, a project that I wanted to always think about doing is following just like black athletes young black athletes, professional athletes, when they transition from like college or get into the league. Cause I just feel like there are some stories that are not told there as far as money management, right? We always hear these stories about them, or just even like behavioral things where they just do a lot of silly things when they first get into the league. And, you know, I just always wanted to like investigate that more. Like, is it resources? Is it background? What kind of things? Especially a lot of them come from these white colleges and institutions and be the person. And then as soon as they get to the league, do something crazy and can lose their job or get some cases, right? And but there are some who don't. And I just want to like compare and contrast to see what are the factors that lead some folks awry and others to, you know, stay quiet and keep their money.
Yeah.
I would have to get networked. I would have to get networked into those professional athletic spaces in order for this to happen.
Let's just invite some guests on the podcast.
I know, right? Start trying to get some athletes on. Maybe LeBron to come and sit down and have a chat with us. That'd be great.
I mean, yeah, we can bring school in Ohio.
Yeah, his school, Promise School, right? And I also seen Russell Westbrook has started his own school as well. So I like that. That's some good stuff. Giving back to their communities. But all in all, we want to thank Dr. Crawford Monde for coming out to chat with us about her work. Really appreciate it. Like I said during the interview, click on the links associated with the description of this episode and her social media links to follow her and all the work that she's doing, and be on the lookout for her book slated to come out in 2022. We'll be on the lookout for that. I'm sure it'll be amazing. After you do that, go ahead and follow us on social media at BHD Podcast is our social media handle on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Of course, you can visit our website, blackandhighlydangerous.com, to keep up all our latest content. You can email us, bhdpodcast@gmail.com, if you have any thoughts, ideas, questions, concerns, guests, suggestions, whatever it is we want to hear from you. We always like to hear from you. Then after you do that, if you can, go ahead and review and rate us on iTunes. That really helps us out with the algorithms so that more people can find us. And then after you review and rate us, share us with your friends, share us with your family, share us with your enemies. And as always, continue to be the oppressor's worst fear.
If you're interested in continuing this and other conversations, visit our website, blackandhighlydangerous.com, to subscribe to our email list, suggest topics, and participate in our discussion forums.
Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at BHD Podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe and rate our podcast on your favorite platform. And as always, continue to be the oppressor's worst fear.